Hello everyone, and welcome to this session 4 of What Matters Most. In this lesson, we're going to look at growing together. You've probably figured it out by now, but to start something doesn't take as much work as growing something. For instance, if you took a seed and put it in the ground and planted it, you don't do a whole lot till it comes out of the ground. And then it starts growing and you have to water it, you have to weed it, you have to maybe prune it, and then you have to harvest it. Well, the same way with relationships. To get a relationship started, sometimes it doesn't take a lot of work. Like a dating relationship, everything's fun and nice and good and no conflict. But as that relationship grows together and matures and perhaps you get married, there's a lot of other things that come up that have to be worked out. And so when we get into the nitty-gritty of growing together, it requires us to, again, add in that component of love. Let's begin here with the Bible focus. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11, it says, "Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing." Hopefully you're not this kind of person, but those that jump in and out of relationships or maybe in and out of churches or jobs, I realize that there might be some cases where you had 2 or 3 jobs during the year, but if you do that on a regular basis, what ends up happening is you become very shallow as a person. There's some things that you're confronting and you're not really working those things out. You're just kind of jumping back out. And so you end up being a shallow person. Well, that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about growing together. That when we actually reach the hard places, that we work them out with the dimension of love that we're going to talk about here in this lesson. And then you mature, you grow up. So, and a couple of other verses here that I want to read. This is coming out of 1 Corinthians 13. It says, "Love does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth." And then 9 through 11 in chapter 13, it says, "For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me." And so in this passage, it begins to show us that in growing together, we have to grow up as individuals. And so we're going to look at 4 components in this passage that I've just read that helps us, again, understand what love is and how we can grow up and grow together. The first one that I have there is growing together requires patience. Now, I talked about patience in a previous lesson, but it's cycled back around again because it's really important. It says there in the passage, "Love is not rude. It does not demand its own way, and it is not irritable." Another translation said, "It is not easily angered." Are you an easily angered person? What or who causes you to be easily angered? Another translation of this word patience is long suffering. And maybe you're in a situation where you wonder, is this ever going to end? Well, again, God's love and His grace can come upon us to stay in there and work it through to the end. Another verse comes out of Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2. It says, "Be humble and gentle in every way. Be patient with each other and lovingly accept each other." It's not easy at times to be patient. I understand that. But the fact is that as we grow together, it's going to require us to not be rude when we would want to. And we have the tendency, again, to be irritable about things that are not going our way, and to ask for God's love to help us with some staying power, and to not be easily angered, and to stay in a situation until we get God's help and God's love to see it through. The second aspect of growing together is that growing together requires forgiveness. It says in the passage that I read, love keeps no record of wrongs. And that's really what forgiveness is all about. The word literally means to let it go. I picture like standing at a river and whatever we need to forgive someone for, that we actually, like the river is flowing and we take whatever we need, and it's like a driftwood that we put in the water. And as we forgive, it flows down and we can't get it anymore. We just let it go. Now, there's several aspects of forgiveness that I think people sometimes are not aware of, steps that are needed in order to have it come in completeness. The first is there's often a person that either we have offended or has offended us, and somebody that has rubbed us the wrong way and we're carrying a grudge against. And it can be any number of things that have happened over a period of a lifetime. And so usually a person is attached to that. The second is there's oftentimes an incident that took place. Now, there can be more than one, but oftentimes it's related to a particular event or an incident, or it may have happened more than once. You know, one of the apostles, Peter, he went to Jesus one day and he said, listen, he said, I need to forgive somebody. He said, is 7 times enough? And Jesus said, not just 7 times, but 70 times 7. You do the math on that when it comes out to 490 times. And so what Jesus was saying was, don't keep count. Whenever you need to forgive, learn how to forgive. And then the third aspect of forgiveness is how did that event that, again, offended you, you hold a grudge, you're in unforgiveness, how did that make you feel? Because there's always a feeling that is connected with unforgiveness. So the person, the event, and how did that make you feel? And you take all three of those and you wrap them together before God and you say, you know what, I'm letting this go. And I'm not going to withhold it anymore. Now, we forgive for our sake, not for the other person's sake. We're the ones that need to be free. And whether the other people get free, that's really up to them and God. But we have the privilege and the freedom of getting free. And as a result, we feel differently about them. We feel differently about ourselves and God. And we begin to grow. And we begin to grow up. A couple of verses that I have, Corinthians chapter 3, verse 13, said, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord has forgave you. Now, when we started this series, I read a passage about love. It says that we're supposed to love each other as I have loved you. Jesus was talking. And now in this passage, he says that we are supposed to forgive each other as the Lord has forgiven us. Has the Lord forgiven you? Yes, he has. Therefore, you can forgive others. It is possible. Matthew 7, verse 2 reminds us, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. With the same measure you use, it will be measured to you. You know, sometimes people hurt us and they don't even realize it. It's their personality and maybe how we're wired. And then other times they are intentional and we know it and they know it. And other times we do things that we don't even realize we've hurt somebody. But it says that when you find yourself in that situation, if you try to just match how they are responding to you, and you don't respond in love, that you're going to get that back. In other words, if someone's easily angered and you get easily angered at them, then that's what you're going to get back. If you get irritated, and then other people around you, they're going to get irritated too. And so it just works that way. And Jesus reminds us that if we measure out forgiveness, that we're going to get a completely different sense from that person back to us. And God is going to help us grow in our love towards them, even though they might not respond differently. But God's going to put something in us because we choose to forgive and let it go. The third aspect of growing together requires truthfulness. The scripture says that love rejoices with the truth. Someone said one time that the truth will set you free. That's actually what Jesus said. He said the truth will set you free, but it'll make you miserable first. I think that's a very honest statement, because sometimes when we hear truth, whether it be about ourselves or about a situation, it sometimes can be pretty hard to accept. But if we want to grow together, then truthfulness has to be a part of our relationships and how we interact with one another. It says that love rejoices with the truth. And again, that takes maturity, because a child doesn't necessarily rejoice with the truth, like you're being selfish and it's all about you. Children, they don't necessarily like that. They're like, no, this is how I am and this is how I think. But the Bible says we need to grow from that childlike thinking and understanding, and we need to rejoice with the truth. In other words, we should come around each other and say, what's the truth in this situation? Now, the Bible has absolute truths that are like they're truthful, they're right regardless. But then there's also subjective truth, and that is that sometimes certain people can do things and other people can't. And the Bible talks about that. I would call it subjective truth. But the world is trying to feed us that there are no absolute truths, that everything is subjective. In other words, what you decide becomes your truth. Well, that's not biblical truth. That's not biblical love. There are absolutes that whether or not we see it as truth or believe it as truth, it's still truth. And so that's what the Bible calls us to rejoice with, in that kind of truth. It says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15, to speak the truth in love. You know, it's not always comfortable to share truth with people. And sometimes we need to do it in bite sizes. For instance, I think of a bridge. And one of my mentors said that relationships are like a bridge. You know, bridges, not necessarily do we see this on the interstate, but side roads you'll see, you know, this bridge has a 10-ton weight limit or a 12-ton or a 15-ton weight limit. What they're saying is that if you take a big truck and that has, say, a 20-ton truck and put it on that bridge, that it'll actually collapse. Well, relationships are like bridges. You know, they can only handle so much truth at one time. And depending upon what the issues are, you may have to put a shovel full of truth on that particular relationship or that bridge. And if you backed up the truck and dumped the whole load of truth on them at one time, your relationship would break. And that would be no good for anybody. That wouldn't be showing love. So there's wisdom of knowing what kind of or how much truth to share with them at what particular time. So in order to do that, we really need to plan what we're going to say, how we're going to say it, how much we're going to say. And it really does take wisdom and prayer and even counsel at times when we walk into relationships that are being challenged and difficult. How do we share truth and how do we rejoice with the truth? Sometimes it comes in bite sizes and not just, again, dumping the whole load on them to break the relationship. That's not, that would probably be more of a childish way of doing it rather than a mature way of doing it, as the Apostle Paul writes that we need to. The last thing in growing together is that growing together requires seeking the mind of Christ. Let me read the verse again. When I was a child, I spoke about childish matters. For I saw things like a child and reasoned like a child. But the day came when I matured and set aside my childish ways. And then in 1 Corinthians 2, verse 16, it says, but we have the mind of Christ. And many of you listening to this probably have a cell phone. And on that cell phone, you have a limited amount of memory on that device. In other words, you can put things that you want to remember and record and save, but it'll get full. And after it gets full, you have to either increase the memory or get a device with more memory. But if you take that device that has a limited amount of memory and you hook it up to the internet, then what happens is that you have an unlimited amount of information. And you can store more data in the cloud than what you can on your device. Well, in the same way, the way God made us, we have a limited amount of understanding in a situation in relationships. In fact, when I opened up, I read a passage that says that we see in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, the part that we saw disappears because we have a fuller picture of the situation in the relationship. And so I want you to begin to understand that when we are born again, Jesus living inside of us by the Holy Spirit, that we have access to the internet of Christ. We have access to the mind of Christ. And so it's unlimited, not just our perspective that's limited to our device, but we do have the mind of Christ. I think that's so exciting that whatever situation that we find ourselves in that's challenging to grow in, we can seek the mind of Christ. We can pray. We can seek His Word. We can get godly counsel. And as a result of that, we can then break through and receive His love and show His love to those around us. Well, that's it for this lesson and teaching, and I invite you to take the discussion questions and share with one another and pray with one another. And again, I'm going to come back at the very end and do a very practical thing to let you know what you can begin to practice together. And God bless you in your discussion and prayer. All right, I'm back for the practice together section. And just highlighting again the 4 areas that I brought to our attention in growing together is having patience, forgiving people, being truthful, and seeking the mind of Christ. All 4 of those are extremely helpful to, again, grow in and to grow up in order to show the love of Christ. I want to just kind of target this area of forgiveness and want to encourage you that this week I want you to get before the Lord and just ask Him, is there anybody in my life that I need to forgive? And then walk through the steps that I shared with you earlier, and that is a person, an event that took place, and then how it made you feel. Do you feel angry when you think about it? Do you feel ashamed? Do you feel guilty? And all of these areas of unforgiveness has a feeling attached to it. We just wrap it all up and we just let it go. Now, some people resist forgiving others because they think, I'm letting that person off the hook. Because when we hold somebody in unforgiveness, what we're really saying, we may not be thinking that, but what we're really saying is, I want to be their judge, I want to bring their justice, I want to punish them. And in reality, we can't, because we're biased, we're hurt. And so when you forgive somebody, what you're actually doing is like a clothes hanger. You're actually taking them off your clothes hanger, so to speak, and you're putting them on God's. You're saying, God, I'm putting them on your hanger. You can work with them and bring justice to their life and change them in ways that I can't. And so I really encourage you to search your heart. Again, maybe you've done something. You need to forgive someone. Go to God. Maybe somebody's done something to you. You need to forgive them. Start with God. And then you might get to a place to say, you know what, I need to talk with that person. Well, again, if you have any question about whether or not that would be a good thing to do or beneficial, if you have any question, you might want to get some counsel, like your small group leader or maybe an elder or pastor, to say, is this a good idea that I go and tell this person I've forgiven them or not? And so again, counsel to that is important. Again, just closing out here, I want to remind you of your Love Does project. I'm not sure I called it that the last time, but really that's the project that you're doing for the community. And I have a page there for you. You know, who's coordinating that? What are you doing? What's the motivation behind why you're doing it? And when are you going to do it? Again, I'm not expecting that your community project be done this series ends here another week. But I want to encourage you to keep planning it, so that even after this 5 weeks is over, that you can do your Love Does project. And then I would really encourage a bonus session. Come back and just share the things that God taught you through the 5 weeks and what you learned through your community project. And so again, just a reminder about that, to talk about that before you leave tonight. And God bless you, and we'll see you next time.